Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Welcome, another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. I've just been sifting around for the last couple of hours now, trying to make some sense of the decision by the Liberal government, the Canadian government, to back away from the digital services tax that we talked about over the last couple of podcasts, and everybody was talking about over the last 10 or 15 days. Just to catch you up, in case you've been away at the cottage where there's no service, this was a tax that was actually passed by the Canadian Parliament years ago, almost 5 years ago, but it took them that long to enact it, and okay, the payment started. Long story short, it was supposed to start at the end of June. Trump all of a sudden kicked in and said that it was wrong, and he was going to break off, or hadn't broken off, according to him, all negotiations, trade negotiations with Canada. So Sunday evening, after a lot of going back and forth, I guess, with some of the key members of his cabinet, Prime Minister Carney announced that the Canadian government was not going to go ahead with this tax, with the digital service tax. And, well, there's been a lot of flack, some pro, some con, an awful lot of opinions about exactly what happened. To listen to the White House spokesperson, when Caroline Leavitt, we've seen her, I'm sure, on TV. She's the talking head that stands in front of the podium and basically mouthpieces anything that Trump and his minions tell her to say. Her comment was that, well, Trump talked to Carney about it and said, I'm cutting off negotiations. And our prime minister caved into Donald Trump. And I got upset by watching this, and I was talking to some of my colleagues about this, and they said, look, keep in mind the context here, okay? Carolyn Leavitt got the job. Basically, she was the girlfriend of one of Trump's major financial contributors. And I guess this was the quid pro quo. It's a phrase that Trump used to like to use once in a while. So she's hardly somebody who's qualified for the position, which qualifies her for the Trump administration, doesn't it? But anyway, forget that. If you want to know what's going on, and if you want to know the reasons why, and you want to know the implications, a couple of things. Don't talk to the politicians about it, because you're only going to get spin. Pro and con. Watch which economists you talk to. Not Kevin O'Leary, as for instance. O'Leary is really getting under my skin, and I'm sure an awful lot of other people too. He's always been a rather obnoxious individual anyway, but over the last little while, he seems to have gone out of his way to try to curry favor with Donald Trump. I guess this gets some invitations down to Mar-a-Lago, which is maybe his end game here. But as one person who's been in the economic world for a long, long time explained to me the other day, people like O'Leary and Elon Musk to a certain extent too, are almost like the buzzards of the financial world. They're not inventors. They basically swoop into companies that are in faltering positions or maybe have gone all the way down the drain, and they simply move in there, buy them on pennies on the dollar, and increase their portfolio. But are they giving anything? Well, we can argue that another time. But I think any credibility that O'Leary had over the last little while has long since gone. And so listen to what he says, or don't listen to what he says. I was going to say with a grain of salt. The grain of salt, I think, is probably over-exaggerating exactly just how much of a contribution he's got. But anyway, let me circle back to what's going on here. Carney made the decision, and as he explained, he said there's a long game that's at play here. And of course, what they want to do is they have to strike a deal with Canada and the U.S., some sort of a trade deal. And both Trump and Carney, as we know, set an arbitrary deadline, but it's fast approaching. It's, I think, less than 2 weeks away now, where they thought they were going to get a deal. And it hasn't happened yet, clearly. And when Trump says, well, we're not even going to negotiate, well, something had to happen. And as Carney explained, and I've talked to a number of people about this earlier today that seem to concur with this whole idea of the digital service tax was probably going to get knocked out anyway during these negotiations. The U.S. government has been against this for a long, long time. Not just Trump, the Biden government before that, even the Obama administration had some qualms about some sort of a tax like this simply because of the implications. Now, you got to keep in mind the fact that it's gone now is something that needs to be debated, but the implications of that. I mean, the press release or the tweet or the Truth Social thing that Trump put out there said this is a victory for American workers. Hardly. It's a victory for the billionaires that Trump already likes. We're talking about, the Zuckerbergs and the Musks and others that control those social media platforms. Yeah. They're not going to have to pay the tax. And so they're happy campers right now because, none of them can afford it. They're only multi-billionaires. And who cares about fairness when you can accumulate wealth, right? That's what these guys are all about. And frankly, that's what Trump's all about. So this is really no surprise. Now, the question, though, is not why it happened, because I think any clear thinking person understands why Carney did what he did, because it's important to get these negotiations back on track. And that's already happened. It was Sunday night that Carney announced that the Canadian government was not going to move forward with this. By Monday morning, both sides, Americans and Canadians, were back at the negotiating table. So from that standpoint, mission accomplished. Now, raises the bigger question: what are we going to get in the long term? Okay, sensible people, analytical people would look at this and say, well, Canada just gave up something that they were going to implement that was going to cause or create an awful lot of revenue for the government. And so that's off the table now. You'd like to think that in a negotiation, now the ball's in the Americans' court. Okay, what are you going to give Canadians and the Canadian government in return? You'd like to think, if it was a fair-minded negotiation, something would be put on the table. I know what we're talking about here. What Carney wants, what Canadians want, is a reduction, if not a total obliteration, to use one of Trump's favorite words, of all these crazy taxes that he's putting on right now, these surcharges, these tariffs on softwood lumber, on steel and aluminum, and the list is endless. Is there going to be any forgiveness of that? Is he going to say, okay, we're going to rescind those tariffs because they were unfair anyway? Well, the short answer from my standpoint, I don't think so. And I mentioned this in a previous podcast, and it's a tough reality, but I think it's something that we have to face here. And I know the Canadian government certainly has to face this going forward. Donald Trump does not negotiate. Donald Trump wants to conquer. And you saw that with his reaction to Carney's decision, that, he won a big victory. He has to win. It's just not a matter of give and take. Trump does not like to give. He loves to take, but he's not one of these guys to say, okay, let's try to even this out just a little bit. He's maintained, even to this day, that the tariffs are here to stay. Now, is he going to back away from that? I know he has backed away from other decisions that he's made, even with tariffs with other countries. I'm not optimistic it's going to happen. I'm not going to sit here and say it's never going to happen, because if we learned one thing over the last 2 or 3 weeks, trying to predict what this orange megalomaniac in the White House is going to do from 1 minute to the next is just a fool's game. You just don't know what's going to happen, who he talked to last, what other influences are going around in all that space he has between his ears. So we don't know just what's going to happen here with the negotiation. I do know that, the one thing that, as we've talked about, is you can't trust Donald Trump. Not just Canada, but everybody else. Commitments that the U.S. government have made, commitments that Trump himself has made, he has rescinded 24 hours or days later, simply because, well, whatever whim, I guess, has crossed his mind at that particular time. Don't forget, the reason that we're even having negotiations about a new trade deal between Canada and the U.S. is Trump basically said he refuses to live by the deal that was negotiated by his government in his first term. We call it the Kuzma deal here. It was the renegotiated NAFTA deal. We all know about that. And at the time when Trump signed it, and it was his team that negotiated this, Trump said this was the greatest trade deal of all time. This was going to be great for the American people, the American workers, and American business. He couldn't heap enough praise on it. Now, all of a sudden, he says it's a piece of garbage and he's not going to adhere to any of this stuff. So can you take this guy at his word? No, you can't. So where are we now? I mean, you talk about a government that's trying to find some sort of an agreement, trying to find a deal for the Canadian worker and the Canadian businesses. How do you do it with a guy like this, whose word you can't trust, who you look at right now and say what he says today may be totally opposite of what he says tomorrow? And he is right to a certain extent that, yes, the U.S. business economy and the government regulations in the States are a huge obstacle to overcome. And when the U.S. steel industry keeps telling Trump, we need those tariffs, and yet other businesses down there, not just here, but down there, are saying, no, we have to maintain this relationship, this interrelationship, this trade relationship between Canada and the United States. He's not listening to that. And unlike what happened in his first term, as we've seen very clearly, there are no clear-headed people around that table right now, nor in the negotiating room, that can say, Mr. President, have you thought maybe this is the better way to go? These guys are just sycophants and yes people for him, from Ludnick and certainly J.D. Vance and right on down. They don't dare cross Trump. They don't dare say maybe there's a better way, Mr. President, for fear that he's going to lambaste them. on social media. The deck is stacked, certainly, against Canada right now. I'm hoping for the best. I think we're all hoping for the best, but we're very, very concerned about what's going to be happening over the next little while. And of course, he's brought up the idea of supply management once again for Canada's dairy industry, and again stated incorrect statistics about this, as he did the first time in those negotiations. There is no 400% increase in tariff. What that is a penalty clause in case U.S. people that are buying Canadian dairy products exceed the limits that were mutually agreed upon. And nobody's ever come close to exceeding those limits. So it's simply there as a safeguard. It's never been charged. Nobody's even come close to being liable for something like that. But Trump's using that barometer to suggest that, well, it's a bad deal for American farmers. You know why? Because somebody in the American farmer lobby said it was a lousy deal. And Trump, of course, doesn't know anything about any of this stuff, so he simply takes their word over the reality when you look at the numbers. And that's what we're dealing with here. I wish our government luck. It's a monumental task to try to deal with this guy. But in the long and short of it, the deal and that's on the table right now with the digital services tax is not that big a deal. I know the opposition parties and Poilievre and the NDP leaders and of course Blanchet in Quebec have all said, well, we've lost faith and this is a terrible thing. No, it's not. If in a real world and in a practical world, giving up this tax got us back to a better deal at the bargaining table, all will be forgiven. Because, I'd rather, if the quid pro quo here was, oh, yeah, we're not going to do that tax, but hey, the steel tariffs are gone now, they'd be dancing in the streets. I'd like to think that's what's going to happen. I don't necessarily have a lot of confidence that it will happen, but that's the end game here. And you can't negotiate if you're not at the table with the other side. That's all there is to it. So far, so good. As we do this podcast, they're talking, and that's something they weren't doing 48 hours ago. As to where that's going to lead, well, it kind of depends on the mood Trump is in, I guess, on any given day, and what kind of advice he's getting. But we wish the Canadian government luck and see just how this is going to play out. But keep in mind, if Carney had not done what he had done, there'd be no discussion. And no discussion means no deal. As a matter of fact, there was the threat, and that's what it really was, from Trump that there would be even more severe tariffs to be announced in the next couple of days. So are we still there? Well, as they say in the business, stay tuned. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks so much for being with us today. You can pick us up on any of the platforms, and we're so glad that you do, on YouTube, on Substack, Spotify, Apple, Blue Sky, so many others. And keep the comments coming, too. We'd love to get your feedback as to how you feel about these key topics, because they're going to have an impact on all of us as we go forward here. Thanks, as always, to Madeline Kelly for the great work putting this one together. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.